Welcome to the Wilson Center, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the full name, and to the event, How Society and Security Are Changing in an Aging World. My name is Richard Sincata. I am a political demographer at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., and a consultant for the Environmental Change and Security Program at the Wilson Center. As you know, some of you know here and in our web audience, the Wilson Center is the national memorial dedicated to our 28th president. Wilson was the only U.S. president to have been awarded a PhD, which he received at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, not too far from here. And his research was in American history and politics. The Wilson Center's goal is to essentially reproduce the atmosphere that Wilson strived to produce when he was a president of Princeton University, governor of New Jersey, president of the United States. And that is to bring those who are involved in the formulation of government policies, together with those who have practical experience and informed opinions, together with researchers in academic institutions. This seminar is a product of the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Project, which has been in existence for 19 years. It only feels like 5 to me, but it's been a quick 19. Through its seminars, its web broadcasts, and its publications, the program explores non-traditional security relationships, primarily relationships that arise between political conditions on one hand, and on the other hand, public health, demography, aspects of the biotic and abiotic environment, and human livelihoods. Today's event is on population aging. It's brought to you by the Wilson Center's HELPS project, HELPS, which is an acronym in the world of acronyms in DC. It stands for Health, Environment, Livelihoods, Population, and Security. It's a 5-year effort funded by USAID's Office of Population and Reproductive Health, and we thank them. This event is a launch of an extremely informative and well-conceived multi-authored publication, which I've read in its entirety, actually. And it was sponsored by Help Age International and the United Nations Population Fund, which we'll call UNFPA from now on. The publication is shown on this. Oh, it isn't shown on the screen here. Let's see. Maybe I can. Well, I have actually. What I'll do is I'll show it when I start my presentation. But I'll get to that in a second. But we'll have the web, the way you access the web on a slide in the beginning of my presentation. Today's speakers are to my left, Bethany Brown, who is the policy director at Help Age USA in Washington, D.C. Help Age describes itself as an organization that builds upon 25 years of experience helping older people in more than 80 countries lead full, secure lives and overcome discrimination. Our second speaker, Jose Miguel Guzman from UNFPA, fell ill, as many people do at this time of the year, so we hope he feels better soon. But we are very fortunate to have Dr. Ann Pawliczko in his stead. Dr. Pawliczko is a senior technical advisor at the Population Development Branch of the United Nations Population Division, UNFPA. She serves as the focal point for population aging and migration, and is the senior advisor on the collection of data concerning resource flows for population activities. Now, both boast extensive experience. It should be on the forms that that are in front of you, their bios. So rather than dwell on that too much, what I'll do is kick this off. Remember, today's event is webcast live, and it will be later posted on the Woodrow Wilson site, where it can be downloaded or streamed in its entirety with supporting documents. And I'm supposed to announce that sandwiches are available for only 10 minutes more.
No. In 10 minutes, there'll be additional sandwiches.
Oh, there'll be additional sandwiches. Okay.
You get a chance to.
Okay, I thought you ran out. They were delicious. You shouldn't make some things so delicious, actually, here. They go quickly. Because it's webcast, please don't forget to turn on the mic, speak into the mic, and questioners will need to have a mic in front of them and to introduce themselves and state their affiliation. So, without further ado here, I'll try. I'll try to get rid of this, which I'm just having a heck of a time doing. Okay, I got it. Now, what? Let's see. Okay, I see it. Oh, yeah, what a mess. Okay, what I'll do is start here. Okay, I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do is just start with a little intro on population aging. Now, just a few slides. Many of you have seen me present these slides, and some of you have seen it in Global Trends 2030. And if you haven't, I commend you to that publication, which was released just a month ago. It's produced by the National Intelligence Council in the U.S., and it concludes a chapter on demography and how that drives international affairs. Let's see. So what I'll do, I think people have had enough time on the outside there on the web to take a look at that that website. So what I'm showing you here is the world, basically, in demographic terms, in age structural terms. The bottom of the graph is people over 65, which I'm approaching, and the vertical axis is people under 30. All those black dots are the countries of the world. They're thrown in there for the year 2010. And what they demonstrate, actually, is the diversity of population age structures that exist in the world today. Up on the top are countries like Afghanistan, Nigeria, most of equatorial sub-Saharan Africa. And down toward the bottom right are countries that have gone through this transition, the age structural transition, and then have ended up with a high median age and a relatively large proportion of seniors, people over 65. And if you look at those three at the bottom, you can see Japan is in the lead, and Italy and Germany are not far behind. Now, to make things simple for some of the policymakers and that I deal with, I've tried to make pictures of what age structures look like. And if you haven't seen these before, and I think most of you have, they're really two bar graphs turned on their side. The left-hand side are males, the right-hand side are females. They are based on the proportion of the population, the entire population, that are in each of those 5-year cohorts. Each of those bars represent a 5-year group of people, starting at toddlers, infants and toddlers at the bottom, and 0 to 4, and then every 5-year group that comes afterwards is piled up on top. This is Japan from 1935 to 2025. Of course, the 2025 is a projection by the UN Population Division, and it's medium variant. 1935, Japan had a very youthful population. Lots of kids, lots of young adults, difficult to find jobs for them, except it appeared to be a time when militarism became in fashion. Many people were recruited into government service, particularly the military. 1970, things had changed. Fertility had already been come down to replacement level 2.1 since 1960. It's been there for 10 years. The age structure changed dramatically. I call that an intermediate population, intermediate age structure. On the lower left is a mature age structure that is that occurred and has still occurred for the last 20 years. In 1990, it looked like that. much more regular in a shape, two bulges that were created as women went through their reproductive years. And finally, we have an age structure or different age structures that look like the one on the bottom right, which is I call a post-mature age structure. It's beyond mature. Fertility has stayed, in this projection actually, fertility has remained low. And there is a large proportion of retirees, people who have moved past the age of 65. We don't know if they'll indeed be retired, but they're of that age. And the workforce is more mature than it is, say, in the United States. Now, that isn't something that's just happening in developed countries. It's something that's occurring in countries in Africa, the Middle East, in Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean, and some of them are quite advanced, actually. Here's Tunisia, a country that's in the news. You can see what its age structure looked like in 1965, actually about the time that U.S. aid was invited by President Bourguiba to participate, to bring its family planning program to advise the Tunisian program. By 1990, the age structure had changed, still youthful, below the median age of 25. Right now, in 2010, it's a different age structure altogether, one that looks a lot like the Asian tigers did when they were in their in the late 70s through the 1980s. And in 2025, the UN projects that Tunisia will have an age structure that is very similar to developed countries today. So when we take a look at Tunisia, people want to say youth, but in fact, it's an age structure that's moved on. It still has a large cohort of youth that are moving up into the reproductive years, the years of work, but that will be followed by much smaller cohorts. It will be easier to educate. It will be easier to employ in Tunisia in a short while. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but political demographers make their trade by looking at the propensity for different sort of state behaviors to occur at different points in the age structural transition, different points in that arc that flowed down that you saw in the other graph. There's a high incidence of conflict in the early years, rise of liberal democracy in the intermediate stage of the age structural transition, rapid economic growth that starts in the late part of the youthful stage and proceeds through the intermediate, and then debt challenges that occur at either side of the age structural transition. Now, the point I wanted to make with this is that when we're going to talk about aging is the progress that can be defined in two different ways: the progress of median age, the increase in median age that goes on as fertility declines. But it also could be the accumulation of seniors as a proportion of the total population, a proportion of the working age. It's measured in different ways. The point made here is that aging is a great thing when you're a very youthful country. The question we're going to deal with today is once one goes through some of the more advantageous parts of their age structure, that is the intermediate and mature category, what happens next when seniors make up a large proportion of the population? Actually, we don't know. We just don't know because we haven't experienced sort of the depths of that post-mature age structure. So much of what we talk about is speculation. I think it's thoughtful speculation. And we have some evidence from watching people age in our societies. Aging has been going on an individual level and a community level for a long, long period, even in very youthful countries. So that kind of brings to you the differences between sort of individual and community aging as vis-a-vis, say, population aging, particularly when it's on a level of a state. So here's what we're looking at In a global sense, this map is in Global Trends 2030. This is 2010, according to the UN, in terms of median age. I've broken it into the 4 categories that I've shown you. There's only 3 categories that are present today. Youthful, you can see in the dark red, much of sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, parts of Asia and Latin America. And intermediate in other places in the developing world, and then mature throughout what we consider the industrial world, but also it's happening in other places, and I'll show you by 2030 how this has changed dramatically. So now we still have youthful countries, even in 2030, according to the UN Population Division's medium variant. But we have many more mature countries. We have many more countries in the intermediate stage of their age structural transition. And then we have, you can see those green ones in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Actually, you can't see Singapore. And in parts of Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Central Europe, we see a new category, that category that is beyond the median age of 45. So most of these will be between 45 and 50 by 2030. And with that, I'll leave it and introduce our first speaker, and let Bethany Brown take the stage. Would you like to come up here? And we'll try to get this going. Let's see.
Maybe if you X out of that box.
Yeah.
Would you be able to make that one full size for the big screen?
Yeah, like this. And then, is that good?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Rich, for that great overview. And thank you to the Wilson Center for hosting us, to Sarah Craven from the UNFPA here in DC for all of her work to make this happen. And a big thank you to Dr. Ann Pawliczko for saving us at the 11th hour and coming down from New York. I'm Bethany Brown. I'm the policy director at HelpAge USA, and I am so excited to be here with you today. What we're talking about has huge implications for the rest of the world, for us as individuals. And the report that we've been working on, it has a lot to say about what's coming in the future. A quick point of order here on nomenclature. I was at an international meeting on older people a few weeks ago, and a gentleman from the Department of Justice turns to me and says, "We're talking about seniors, right?" And I said, yes, that is what we're talking about here. I want you to use this different language, older people, older persons, sort of as a distance so that we can think about some equally abstract numbers. So the percentage of the world's older people is set to double to 22% by 2050. 80% of those people will live in developing countries. This slide shows that by 2050, people over 60 will outnumber those under 15. Life expectancy at birth may be pretty different between developed and developing countries, but life expectancy at age 60 isn't so different. And it's increasing rapidly. Right now, life expectancy is over age 80 in 33 countries. Just 5 years ago, there were only 19 countries that had reached that statistic. In the UK, 1/3 of all babies that were born last year are likely to celebrate their 100th birthday. 100 million older people struggle to survive on less than $1 a day right now in 2013 in the US, in the world. Their economic and social potential is both unrecognized and unrealized. HelpAge believes that older people should not just be included in development, but they're a key to accelerating development in the most marginalized places. In an aging world, investing in older people has never been more crucial. This is why I'm excited to be talking to you today about the findings of our joint report with the UNFPA to talk about these implications for our shared future. The report is the culmination of 3 years of HelpAge and UNFPA collaboration. It includes a global review of national policies, programs, legislation data, and research relating to older people carried out with the UNFPA in 2010 and 2011, as well as input from each UN regional commission and 12 agencies from the UN system. This collaboration is central to our vision of ensuring a world that's better for all generations. We conducted a qualitative assessment with older people's experiences in almost 36 countries with over 1,300 older men and women. At the heart of Help Age International is our work with our affiliates and partners who work in low and middle income countries alongside older people. We work with people just like the ones in those focus groups, people who are caring for their grandchildren, people whose children are caring for them, or running a small business. We support older men and women to claim their rights, to challenge discrimination, and to overcome poverty. And we do see population aging as a triumph of development. Clean water, sanitation, declining fertility rates, all of these things, vaccinations, all these things enable population aging for us. We have over 100 affiliates in over 40 countries, and we have 4,000 older persons associations around the world. These are groups of 50 to 100 older people who gather together in their towns, in their cities, around issues that they care about. Our program and policy work incorporates their priorities into work. It covers the core issues older men and women are most concerned with, such as health, income security, being both supported and valued in emergencies, the care of their dependents, supporting their struggles, support in their struggle against discrimination, and their daily contributions to their families, communities, and societies. As this graph shows, the bulk of our resources go to different areas of development: social protection, emergencies, HIV/AIDS, and livelihoods. We endeavor to work alongside and listen to older people in all of our work and support them to bring that experience to policymakers directly. Together, we're figuring out how to become a society of longer lives, and that's the primary message of this report. So let's cut to the chase. What do older people want? In the focus groups, older people described the importance of the recognition and of the value that of the contributions that they make as carers, as workers, as farmers, as entrepreneurs, as community representatives, as voters. They want security, meaning income, for themselves and their families. They want good health with no untreated health problems like hypertension or cataracts. They want an end to negative behavior from service providers, meaning that old age is not an incurable disease. They want an end to fear and an end to discrimination. They want equal protection before the law. These things show how aging has been mismanaged so far. In focus groups, when people were asked about what their biggest challenges were, 67% believed that ageism exists in their world. 37% had experienced old age discrimination in the previous year. 43% were afraid of personal violence. 53% find it difficult or very difficult to pay for basic expenses, and 34% find it difficult or very difficult to access health care when they need it. International poverty experts call older people the poorest of the poor in any society. Cruelty, degradation, and deprivation are the hallmarks of the later years for millions of people. And I'd like to talk a little bit about why that is. The world is changing in many ways, along with population aging. Notions of filial piety or respect from family who will provide protection can seem outright quaint after hearing the sorts of concerns that older people brought to our attention in those focus groups. Changes are happening drastically in rural places. Rural aging has major implications. When middle generations migrate to search for work, older people remain behind. In rural China, grandparents care for 38% of children under 5 whose parents have gone to work in cities. Today, 72% of older Vietnamese people live in rural areas, with the vast majority involved in agricultural production. Many countries' agricultural labor forces are aging. In Indonesia, 80% of the nation's 140 million farmers are over the age of 45 right now. In a decade, the average age of China's population of working farmers will be between 50 and 60. There's an urgent need to adapt farming technologies and policies that will adapt to the capacities and needs of these older farmers and the communities that they're feeding. Another change has to do with HIV/AIDS, as well as rural to urban migration. Older people are at the front line of the battle against HIV, caring for the sick, caring for their grandchildren who have been orphaned by people who died of HIV or AIDS. And UNICEF estimates that 40 to 60% of orphaned and vulnerable children in East and Southern Africa are cared for by their grandparents. World Bank statistics show that 81% of children orphaned by AIDS in Zimbabwe alone are cared for by an older person, a person over 60. These families often struggle with poverty. They struggle to be able to send their kids to school. They struggle to be able to get their kids enough to eat. Another change is the non-recognition of the informal labor market. In Vietnam, the ILO estimates that 43% of older people are still working, but most are self-employed or employed in the agriculture that we were talking about earlier. Everywhere in the developing world, older people work and make up a significant portion of the informal work sector. Women often supporting households with domestic labor and childcare, freeing up younger family members to look for higher paying jobs. The challenge is to ensure that everywhere ages with security, dignity, and well-being. For every 100 women over 60, there are only 84 men. Older women in particular face the cumulative effects of multiple kinds of discrimination that they experienced over the whole course of their lives. So that's discrimination in terms of their education, their wages, their access to formal and paid labor markets, which makes them even more vulnerable without formal pension plans later and without access to the same economic resources as men. Special efforts must be made to understand and support these gender and age policy differences that we're seeing happen. The living arrangements, protection issues, and access to basic services for women and men as they age are an important part of figuring out how to create an equitable society. So we've talked about what older people are contributing. Now let's look at what we as a society are missing out on. Rich's post-mature age structure can be an advantage if we are intentional about changing the way that society operates in order to address the changes in population structures. As we rekey the way we think about longer-lived societies, informal economies, and economic productivity versus income, we need to take a hard look at our assumptions. When we ignore this new, older world we're living in, we create inequalities and injustice that can have destabilizing effects, as we've discussed. For example, only 20% of the world's older people have any access to some form of social security, and yet dependency ratios are a classic tool for economists to measure the economy in a given country. A dependency ratio relates the number of children and the number of older persons, people under 15 and people over age 65, to a theoretical working age population. This does not work for most of the world's aging population. The fact is, most older people continue to contribute and be productive until their entire lives, and they work until the day that they die. This is relevant to our discussion of what we're missing out on because as people's health may fail, it can become difficult for older adults to earn a living to support themselves and their families. Their vulnerability to poverty can be extreme, and it can be exacerbated by the crippling costs of medical care if they're lucky enough to have access to it. So here's an example. The World Health Organization study on global aging and adult health SAGE, suggests that while the prevalence of high blood pressure in people over 50 in South Africa is around 75%, only 8% of those people are receiving treatment. Hypertension can be effectively controlled by a simple generic medication that costs about $10 per person per year. This study shows that even the most basic care is not accessible to the vast majority. With poor health, older people are not as productive, they die preventable deaths, and if they're disabled, they lose out and we lose out. Older people in developing countries carry over 3 times the burden of visual impairment as those in the developing world. According to the World Report on Disability from 2011, there are 15 million people in developed countries living with visual impairments. In the developing world, there are over 94 million. And think about it, if a person can't see, they can't do things that could help them participate in society. They can't do things that would help them to participate in the economy. We cannot afford not to support them in their continued contributions. Another way we miss out on the important contributions of older people is the wisdom and experience that they can provide to communities to rehabilitate and rebuild after a disaster. There have been some awful examples of what happens when they're not supported. 15% of the populations of New Orleans was older people, but they accounted for 70% of the deaths after Hurricane Katrina. In the Japanese earthquake, people over 60 represented 30% of the affected population, but 64% of the deaths. This is something that's not reflected in the way that we give money. Despite their growing share of the population, less than 1% of humanitarian aid made its way to older people in 2010 or 2011. We, HelpAge, are very proud of our ongoing partnership with USAID's Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, which recently rolled out partner guidelines that include some protection for older people, specifically in emergencies. Older people have specific needs and they have specific strengths. They have an important role to play in this equal and just society that we're all trying to create. The recognition and value that they have is something that can be addressed with human rights. At the UN and at the Organization of American States, governments are recognizing the need for stronger protections of older people's human rights. Age does not mean that human rights become less important. On the contrary, the potential loss of autonomy in old age is very closely connected to human rights violations. When a group of people is systematically denied rights to own property, to access their own income, to bring domestic abuse to justice, and to make decisions about their own lives, just for a few examples, a society cannot thrive. We've seen the destabilizing effects of inequality. We saw it in the Arab Spring, and we'll see it many other times played out in different iterations. If one quickly growing group becomes increasingly disenfranchised and disempowered, we must look at that squarely. We must recognize that isolation brought on by aging, discrimination brought on by aging, and the blind spot that it can be for all of us until we ourselves can no longer deny that we're old is an important thing to face. At the same time, we must challenge our own worldview and attitudes that tend to paint older people as mainly dependent and frail, and change it to one that sees and values older people as they age as agents of change and as partners in development and economic progress. We must see them in a way that reflects a reality that's increasingly similar for developed and developing countries alike. So, to summarize some of the main findings from the report, our recommendations are that a consultation is required with older people to get it right. We have to listen to them. We have to make older people's rights explicit and enforce them. We have to extend universal measures for health, income, and equal access to essential goods and services and policies. And these things, without budgets connected to them, will not work. We need to introduce flexible employment, lifelong learning, removal of forced retirement, and offer retraining opportunities for older people. We need to develop support systems that avoid isolation of older people. We need to disaggregate all nationally representative data by age so that we can actually see who these people are and what's going on in their lives. We need to ensure the inclusion of older people in national humanitarian responses and disaster management and preparedness programs. At the global level, we need to put in place a UN Convention on the Human Rights of Older People to ensure a translation of those inalienable rights into national law and policy. We need to ensure that for the post-2015 Millennium Development Goals, older people are included in the next framework. With the right measures in place to secure health care, regular income, and legal protection as we age, there are gains that can be made for future and current generations. So, together, we're all rewriting the script for old age. It's in our best interest, it's in our parents' best interest, and it's in our children's best interest. We will all miss out if we don't learn to accept the benefits to a society that this exciting new possibility of population aging represents. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting UNFPA to this important event. Today, I would like to share with you some highlights of our report. On October 1st of last year, the International Day of Older Persons, I was part of the delegation in Tokyo at the official launch of our report, Aging in the 21st Century, a Celebration and a Challenge. It was a very successful launch that kick-started a whole series of launches around the world, in Geneva, Copenhagen, New York, and individual country offices from India to Brazil. In fact, the Tokyo launch was followed by a flurry of activities in nearly 50 other countries. The media attention we received was impressive. 2 official press conferences in Tokyo, one with Japanese media and one with the foreign press, were followed by individual interviews given by UNFPA Executive Director Dr. Babatunde Oshotimane and HelpAge International CEO Mr. Richard Blewett and myself in Tokyo. The interest continues to this day. Why is this important to note? Population aging has never before received such worldwide coverage. Aging has finally come into its own. What is important is to build on this momentum. Follow-up activities will be critical. We must not let the world forget. Why did we pick Tokyo for the official launch? Japan has the highest percentage of older persons in the world. It also is taking the lead on policies and programs to address the implications of an aging population. Shortly after the Tokyo launch, we brought our report and its message to Africa, even though Africa is the youngest continent, with only 6% of its population aged 60 years or older. But by 2050, 10% of Africa's population will be 60 or over. In 1998, then United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan had this to say at the launching of the International Day of Older Persons, and I quote, "We are in the midst of a silent revolution that extends well beyond demographics, with major economic, social, cultural, psychological, and spiritual implications." Today, 14 years later, the silent revolution has grown. It is 810 million strong, and it continues to grow. But it is not and should not be so silent anymore. Now we hear the voices of older persons everywhere, and we are listening to them. With 1 in 9 persons in the world aged 60 years or over, projected to increase to 1 in 5 by 2050, population aging can no longer be ignored. And this is no mere speculation. Persons who will reach age 60 in 2050 have already been born. The number of people who turn 60 each year is nearly 58 million, equivalent to almost 2 persons every second. Population aging is one of the most significant trends of the 21st century. It is an unprecedented phenomenon that has implications for all aspects of society. And it is no longer just a developed country phenomenon. It is happening in all regions and in countries with various levels of development. In fact, it is occurring at a faster rate in developing countries, including in countries that still have large populations of young people. By 2050, nearly 80% of the world's older persons will live in developing countries. The number of older persons is projected to reach 1 billion in less than 10 years, and it is projected to double by 2050, reaching 2 billion, or 22% of the global total, outnumbering those under the age of 15 for the first time in human history. In the year 2000, there were already more people aged 60 or over than children under 5. To prepare for an aging world, UNFPA, with HelpAge International as its major partner, spearheaded the publication Aging in the 21st Century, a Celebration and a Challenge. The report is the product of a collaboration of over 20 United Nations entities and major international organizations working in the area of population aging. It is our contribution to the international community's commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the Second World Assembly on Aging, held in Madrid in 2002. I would like to highlight 3 important messages from our report. First, the world is quickly becoming much older, and developing countries are taking the lead in terms of the speed of this process. Second, population aging represents an opportunity, but also huge challenges. And third, aging is not about the future, it is about the present. If no appropriate actions are taken, we will miss an excellent chance to leverage the opportunities and overcome the challenges. Our report shows that population aging is cause for celebration, but is also a challenge. Increasing longevity is one of humanity's greatest achievements. We celebrate the fact that more people are living longer and healthier lives because of improved nutrition, sanitation, medical advances, better health care, education, and economic well-being. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said it best in his message on the International Day of Older Persons, and I quote, "Longevity is a public health achievement, not a social or economic liability." Population aging is a triumph of development. The opportunities are as endless as the contributions that a socially and economically active, secure, and healthy aging population can bring to society. Harnessing these contributions will be very important. But opportunities come with challenges. There is an increasing demand for income security and health and long-term care. These demands create huge social and economic challenges that need to be addressed with strong political will and appropriate forward-looking policies. The challenge is to ensure that all people everywhere can age with dignity and security, enjoying life through the full realization of all human rights. How countries address the challenges of population aging and maximize the opportunities of a growing older population will determine the future of humankind. Our report analyzes the current situation of older persons and reviews progress in policies and action taken by governments and other stakeholders since the Second World Assembly. It identifies gaps and proposes the way forward, with recommendations to ensure an age-friendly world in which everyone, including older persons, is given the opportunity to contribute to development and to share in its benefits. A unique feature of the report is the perspective of 1,300 older persons themselves, based on consultations with older men and women from 36 countries around the world. The first-hand accounts and stories of older persons help to ensure that the issues of the older population are better understood and acted upon. To face the challenges and also take advantages of the opportunities resulting from population aging, our report calls for new approaches to the way that we structure our societies, workforces, and social and intergenerational relations. The report shows that important progress has been made by many countries in adopting new policies, strategies, plans, and laws on aging. But we know that policies and legislation alone are not sufficient to make a real change in the quality of life of older persons. Policies and legislation must be enforced so that older persons can enjoy their human rights, and programs must be implemented and monitored to ensure that they reach those most in need. Dedicated budgets must be in place to ensure implementation. Older persons themselves must be part of the decision-making process in matters that affect them. A strong evidence base is essential for the formulation of effective policies and programs that address the needs of older persons. We need good age and sex disaggregated data on the numbers and projections, as well as demographic and socioeconomic characteristics of the older population. We also need research into the quality of life and health status of older persons and the economic, social, and cultural implications of aging. Our report shows that much more must be done to fully implement the recommendations of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging that was adopted by consensus at the Second World Assembly. Many older persons all over the world continue to lack economic security and access to affordable health care. Many face discrimination, abuse, and violence. Many are being denied basic human rights. We cannot let this continue. Our report stresses the need to address current societal inequalities by ensuring equal access of all segments of the population to education, employment, healthcare, and basic social services that will enable people to live decently in the present and save for the future. Aging is a lifelong process that does not start at age 60. Today's young people will be part of the 2 billion older persons in 2050. The report calls for both investing to improve the quality of life of older persons today and investing in human capital by improving the education and employment prospects of the current generation of young people. A key finding of this report is the incredible productivity and contributions of those aged 60 and over as caregivers, voters, volunteers, entrepreneurs, and more. The report shows that with the right measures in place to secure health care, regular income, social networks, and legal protection, there is a longevity dividend to be reaped worldwide by current and future generations. Again and again, older persons tell us that they want to remain active and respected members of society. We must make sure that they are heard. Government policies and programs typically give low priority to the concerns of older persons because in many countries, the expectation is that the family will take on responsibility of caring for its elderly. But declining fertility, rapid urbanization, and migration are changing the social fabric of traditional family relations. This weakens the ability of the family to provide the necessary care and support for elderly family members, placing an undue burden on the traditional family support network. As a result, private transfers from family can no longer automatically be considered as the only source of income for older family members. But we must also recognize that private transfers often go in the opposite direction, from the older to the younger generations, with older persons helping out unemployed adult children. There are also a significant number of households consisting of older people taking care of grandchildren whose parents have migrated or died of AIDS. Indeed, consultations with older persons around the world point to many cases in which the elderly provide assistance to adult children and grandchildren, not only with childcare and housework, but also with substantial financial contributions to the family. Among the most urgent concerns of older persons worldwide is income security. This, together with health, is most frequently mentioned by older persons themselves. These issues are also among the greatest challenges for governments faced with aging populations. The global economic crisis has exacerbated the financial pressure to ensure both economic security and access to health care in old age. Economic growth is the best way to ensure economic security. Investments in pension systems are seen as one of the most important ways to ensure economic independence and reduce poverty in old age. Social protection floors must be implemented in order to guarantee income security and access to essential health and social services for all older persons and provide a safety net that contributes to the postponement of disability and prevention of impoverishment in old age. There is no solid evidence that population aging per se has undermined economic development or that countries do not have sufficient resources to ensure pensions and health care for an older population. In fact, Studies show that even poor countries can afford a modest pension system, but solutions need to be discussed and agreed, taking into account some sense of intergenerational justice. A study by HelpAge International shows that the cost of universal pension for those over 60 would range between 0.7 and 2.6% of GDP. This is affordable. Yet only 1/3 of countries, covering just 28% of the global population, have comprehensive social protection schemes covering all branches of Social Security. Bolivia, the poorest country in South America, has the highest pension coverage in the region. It amounts to 1.06% of GDP, and since 2008, everyone over 60 is eligible for US $28 monthly. It's $21 for people with other pension entitlements. While significant advances have been made in healthcare, and many older persons say that their access to services has improved, many of the elderly still live in poor health. Much of the disease burden can easily be prevented if new approaches are adopted that foster active and healthy aging. The overwhelming burden of disease in older persons is from non-communicable diseases. Heart disease, stroke, and chronic lung disease are the biggest killers. Visual and hearing impairment, dementia, and osteoarthritis are the main causes of disability. The report points out that good health must lie at the core of society's response to population aging. Older persons must have access to age-friendly and affordable healthcare information and services that meet their needs. This includes preventive, curative, and long-term care. A life course perspective should include promotion of healthy lifestyles from early ages, as well as prevention activities that focus on maintaining independence and preventing and delaying disease and disability. Ensuring that people, while living longer lives, live healthier lives, will result in greater opportunities and lower costs to older persons, their families, and society. An age-friendly physical environment which promotes the development and use of innovative technologies that encourage active aging is especially important as people grow older and experience diminished mobility and visual and hearing impairments. Affordable housing and easily accessible transportation that encourage aging in place are essential to maintain independence, facilitate social contacts, and permit older persons to remain active members of society. More must be done to expose, investigate, and prevent discrimination, abuse, and violence against older persons, especially women who are more vulnerable. Our consultations with older persons point to the many cases of hidden abuse that the elderly suffer, even at the hands of family members. There has been some progress in promoting the human rights of older persons, notably discussions centering on the development of international human rights instruments that specifically address older persons. What must be done to maximize the potential of aging populations? Our report calls for a number of actions that must be taken now to serve the needs of older persons today and prepare for future generations of elderly. In particular, the report found 3 areas where there is a need for change if we are to ensure a society for all ages in which both young and old are given the opportunity to contribute to development and to share in its benefits. First, there is an urgent need to guarantee income security and access to essential health and social services for older people. This requires strong political commitment and planning now to implement the necessary reforms. Second, we must acknowledge that investing in young people today is the best way to improve the lives of future generations of older persons. And third, we must involve everyone, including governments, civil society, communities, families, and older persons themselves, to develop a new culture in which older persons are considered active members of their society and their contributions recognized and promoted. More specifically, our report identified 10 priority actions to maximize the opportunities of aging populations. First, recognize the inevitability of population aging and the need to adequately prepare all stakeholders, governments, civil society, the private sector, communities, and families for the growing numbers of older persons. This should be done by enhancing understanding, strengthening national and local capacities, and developing the political, economic, and social reforms needed to adapt societies to an aging world. Second, ensure that all older persons can live with dignity and security, enjoying access to essential health and social services and a minimum income through the implementation of national social protection floors and other social investments that extend the autonomy and independence of older people, prevent impoverishment in old age, and contribute to a more healthy aging. These actions should be based on a long-term vision and supported by strong political commitment and a secured budget that prevents negative impacts in time of crisis or governmental changes. Third, support communities and families to develop support systems which ensure that frail older persons receive the long-term care they need and promote active and healthy aging at the local level to facilitate aging in place. Fourth, invest in young people today by promoting healthy habits and ensuring education and employment opportunities, access to health services, and Social Security coverage for all workers as the best investment to improve the lives of future generations of older persons. Flexible employment, lifelong learning, and retraining opportunities should be promoted to facilitate the integration in the labor market of current generations of older persons. Fifth, support international and national efforts to develop comparative research on aging and ensure that gender and culture-sensitive data and evidence from this research are available to inform policy making. Sixth, mainstream aging into all gender policies and gender into aging policies, taking into account the specific requirements of older women and men. Seventh, ensure inclusion of aging and the needs of older persons in all national development policies and programs. Eighth, ensure inclusion of aging and the needs of older persons in national humanitarian response, climate change mitigation and adaptation plans, and disaster management and preparedness programs. Ninth, ensure that aging issues are adequately reflected in the post-2015 development agenda, including through the development of specific goals and indicators. And 10th, develop a new rights-based culture of aging and a change of mindset and societal attitudes towards aging and older persons, from welfare recipients to active contributing members of society. This requires, among other things, working towards the development of international human rights instruments and their translation into national laws and regulations, and affirmative measures that challenge age discrimination and recognize older people as autonomous subjects. To conclude, population aging is an irreversible trend. It is happening in all regions and in countries at various levels of development. It is progressing rapidly. We must ensure that people everywhere can face old age with dignity, security, and confidence. Investing in older people is not only the right thing to do, it also makes economic sense, because a healthy older population will continue to be productive for longer. UNFPA has been active in the area of population aging, which is an important component of its population and development program. Our offices around the world are working with governments to develop national policies and legislation on aging, supporting research and data collection efforts, disseminating relevant experiences and good practices to provide countries with the evidence they need to formulate appropriate policies and programs, and advocating for the inclusion of aging in national development frameworks. UNFPA remains committed to working with countries to keep population aging high on the development agenda. As United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon states in the preface to our report, population aging can no longer be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. So I'd like to just open it up for questions, but I'd first like to just hit on a few things that grabbed me from the report, and I commend you to the report. It really is what I call a keeper. It's something that you want on your hard drive. It's it isn't a solid form, right? But it's not. But these days, I actually prefer it to be able to pull it up on the hard drive and take a look at it, or download it to some small device. Contains a lot of information, a lot of interviews, different perspectives, and data at the end. What I picked out of the report and these talks is, and I won't hit on all of the things that impressed me, but first of all, that we should celebrate the extension of life. Basically, people are living longer, healthier lives. But we must recognize that this is a challenge, and particularly for me, for political scientists, or political demographers, I should say, it represents a challenge to the state. We have not created states, or the state that we are now living in, and the international community of states was not developed with this type of age structure in mind. It struggled through through countries being youthful countries, undergoing lots and lots of civil unrest and difficulties in producing stability, leveled off maybe in the middle, and now we're heading into an environment, a political environment, perhaps at least an economic environment that is different, that offers challenges, and these were pointed out very nicely in the report. Secondly, there are documents that are being generated in the international community. The Madrid Plan of Action was mentioned. UNFPA, this is the second report, actually, that UNFPA has done with the cooperation of other NGOs on aging. I commend you to the 2002 report, as well as this one, which is longer, and to take a look at the Madrid Plan of Action. We're usually, for those of us who know of UNFPA, we are usually associated with a much more youthful populations, things that happen that UNFPA has dealt with, and in cooperation with developing countries. That is the problems of maternal mortality, infant mortality, the need for family planning, and the challenges of HIV/AIDS. But this is a great role for UNFPA, and perhaps even the U.S. will find a role as it deals with its own aging issues. And finally, the question of social protection. There's lots and lots of literature being generated and discussion around what social protection is affordable, and what kind of adjustments and promises can be made to people who are on the verge of retirement. And as the speakers noted, you have to start young. You have to have a serious political agenda in making reforms, and there are different kinds of reforms. Parametric reforms were talked about in this, which is reforms to say the age of retirement, the amount of benefits, who will get them, and there are also structural reforms. What will they be? Will it be a government policy? Will it be will there be a private aspect to the benefit structure? Will there be forced savings, et cetera? So with that, I like to start off the questions, at least with one, and I like to, if the speakers can, expand a little bit on the idea of a social protection floor, which was mentioned, and who's done it. What have they noted from doing it, and what is the concept, and how adaptive? How can, say, developed countries like the United States, or developing countries even, get with the program, so to speak? Would you like to start, Ann?
Okay, I can start about talking about social protection floor, what it actually is. It's actually almost like a social security, a network, social safety net so that persons will not fall into poverty. So it's the bare minimum income and also minimum access to health care. So it's two different components there. It's the income and the access to health care, and that is, quote unquote, the protection side of it. So it's throughout the life cycle. So it wouldn't necessarily be only for those age 60 and over, but they would be for very poor people or for disabled people. But in this case, we are concerned about the older population. So social protection floor would be something that people could fall back on because they do not have the money to buy the basic necessities or to get the basic health care that they need.
And I can talk a little bit about the direction that the Social Protection Floor Initiative is taking. It's a project that's sort of being spearheaded by the ILO, the International Labor Organization, with the input of the UNFPA, of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, a number of countries that have specific interest in figuring out how to create the fiscal space to be able to offer better social protection, as well as organizations like HelpAge that can help to motivate grassroots organizations to be able to support it and ask for better healthcare, better Social Security from their governments. There's been a lot of input from the WHO and the Pan American Health Organization, as well as this whole sort of movement has been taking up speed. There is one other component to it. Sometimes they talk about Social Security, healthcare, and access to services, and that's something that means something different in each country. But basically what you're talking about is equitable services. And if anyone in the room or online is interested in learning more about it, you can look at a new site that's been created on the International Labor Organization, the ILO's website, specifically focusing on the Social Protection Floor Initiative.
I'm going to open it up now, and is there someone with the microphone that's so that we can get the question on team? My first question will come from Dalmer. I see you, but I don't see the microphone. Here, over here. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for the panel that really is almost a request for some help here. Because after many, many years of working in the international area, I now work for the Social Security Administration, and I have the opportunity to speak to groups of older people, seniors clubs, and so forth in different areas of the United States, as well as to university students. And both groups ask some pretty tough questions that I never got really before. The older seniors groups often ask me, is it true that it's going to cost more as we age? Is it fair that we always hear this criticism that it is going to cost more? Well, I think the answer is yes, it is going to cost more. We're going to be paying more pensions to more people who are going to be living a lot longer time, and we're going to be paying more health care because as populations age, they tend to be higher users of health care, no matter what kind of measures you put in place to be more efficient and so forth. So we have to be a little bit more honest in talking about an aging population. It does cost more for a society, and if it doesn't cost more, you better look at the red flags flying that something is not happening right for older people. And that's a very difficult message for people to digest. And this relates directly to the question of the younger people, is like, is there going to be anything there when I get there? The great skepticism on the part of people 25 to 45 about whether society will be paying for them as they get to be older. And the toughest question that I've had was right here in town at Johns Hopkins, right a few blocks from here, from students from developing countries who said, and they mostly were from Latin America and Asia, who asked, is it possible that expenditures on older people are already crowding out expenditures on younger people? And the answer to that question is yes. It is already happening. So I think we need to really, in our presentations, be honest and also find a way to link, as Ann said and Bethany said both, the investment in the generations and younger people that leads to better lives for older persons. And I don't think we have that, that language yet. We're talking about intergenerational solidarity. People look at you with little glazed eyes, like, but you know, we really are, as it was said, I think, by our president in one of his campaign speeches, we are all in the same boat as a society. And we need language that shows that the generations are linked. And I need some new PowerPoints. So I'm hoping that you're going to give me some help here, because I'm being pretty badly beat up in my recent speeches.
Dalmer, could you identify yourself? That would give it a...
Elmer Hoskins, Social Security Administration.
And where, this is, yeah, the Social Security Administration. So thank you for that comment.
Delmer is both highly qualified to pose and answer his own questions.
That's why I led off with Dalmer. And actually, Dalmer has done a very nice presentation here with Ron Lee and Andy Mason about 2 years ago, which is online on the Wilson Center on the National Transfer Account. So those of you who would like to see the numerical evidence behind some of the things that were said today can go online and find that. I've watched it twice. It's a lesson in actually what's really happening and where it's happening. I'm sorry?
Public expenditures.
Public expenditures, that's right. Matter of fact, I was you hit on it, which was about about the difference between developed countries and developing countries in terms of what seniors, older people, use for to consume. Do you want to talk about that difference, or it's a big question? Actually, the National Transfer Account showed that a lot of in most developing countries, people trade their assets for security. That is, they trade their land, their house. Sometimes it's to their kids, but they obtain these assets. And the point that was made about women, and since I lived in Kenya at a young age, I saw this, is that if you don't have access, if you don't have rights to those assets, when you're older, no matter how many kids you have, you're in big trouble, and which a lot of older women are.
What I would like to comment on, I agree with your statements and the fact that it is getting to cost more and more, and younger people are asking, will there be enough for me? Actually, it's not only younger people, middle-aged people are also asking, will there be enough for me? Just several things that I wanted to point out here. Most of the healthcare costs are actually in the final years of life, no matter whether the person is old or not, and we tend to forget that. Of course, you know, because as people die, of course, there'll be more in the old, as we call 80 and over. But if someone is disabled, and even in their young ages, that will also cost a lot, and society doesn't seem to, you know, point the finger at them, but just at the other end of the spectrum. Regarding intergenerational relations, we should avoid the fight between the young and the old. The older people are getting the money, or the older people. I was just recently in Macedonia talking to the government about their demographic and development policy, and I heard that the young are saying that the older people are getting the money. Why should the money go to the older people? It should go to the young. Even things like they're getting free transportation, so the buses when we're going to schools are overcrowded in the morning. So it's a fight between young and old, and we should definitely avoid that. And I think I should point out that it's been shown in many, many societies that when older people get pensions, those pensions are used for the entire family. Young girls do not work, but they are left in school for longer, because the grandmothers can afford to send the girls to school, to pay for the tuition, the clothes. So these pensions go a long way. Many, many times, older people will not use the money on themselves, the medication that they would need, but they would spend it on the health care and education of their children, especially if they're taking care of the grandchildren. In many cases, especially now with the economic crisis, when the adults do not have a job, sometimes the only money in the family, the only income coming in is the pensions. So while this should not be a reason for giving older people pensions, but if push comes to shove, and if the government does not want to give money to the older people, maybe that is an argument that they should be giving something, because then the whole family will benefit.
Building on that excellent example, a study that I would commend to all of you is a very short one by Esther Duflo that was published in 2002 or 2003, right when South Africa was beginning to institute a non-contributory pension plan for people over the age of 67 or 68, I think. It might have been a little bit younger for women. What she found as she was looking at the intra-generational transfers that were going on in each household, which is very difficult to measure, was that grandmothers who received this pension had granddaughters who were statistically significantly taller than the control group that she was looking at and did better in school over time. There are plenty of studies out there like that. I commend that one because it's short. But those sorts of examples are things that we can point to, along with all sorts of anecdotes about grandmothers who don't get the hypertension medication that they need because they're caring for their kids. But in terms of what older people use to consume, you're right that a lot of times it also comes from property. And sometimes that isn't by choice, sometimes that's under duress. We see a lot of problems with violence against older women in particular when their spouse passes away because national laws relating to property don't allow widows to be able to hold on to the house that they have. We see that throughout Africa. And Dalmar, I think that you picked up on a great point when you were describing this whole tension around crowding out one group or another group. And maybe intergenerational solidarity isn't the word that we want to use to describe it, but those sorts of examples of the way society actually can work together really well are what we should be pointing to and thinking about. We need to think about what kind of a society we want to be. Do we want to be a society that values one group so much over another that it's to the detriment of another, or do we want to treat all people as their equal? It's something that we need to come to terms with and have an answer for.
I can just add, we need to remember what Madrid said, a society for all ages. And that's not that the older people want more attention, but they just want to be treated equally.
There was a second. Yes.
Hi, I'm Gary Merritt. Thank you for a report of your findings and suggestions. I want to, the previous two comments have a segue to my question as well. What was wanting for me in the presentation was an absence in the suggestions and concerns and challenges of an accent on personal responsibilities. Now, that is such a vexing issue in political economics, but the matter of savings and how to change human nature so that people do typically better jobs of saving for their older and more dependent years, but it was conspicuously absent from what you reported from your report. The signal of the problem that this discourse will have in the domestic U.S. political discourse was suggested by the moderators, I guess, last graph with the four things that included indebtedness. populations of an age structure, an age pyramid, a steep age pyramid, are characterized by high indebtedness. Those that are the inverse, with a high proportion of older people, likewise, based on empirical evidence to date, are characterized by perhaps even more indebtedness, at least taking the darkness of the lines in the graph, and speculative though it be. We are going to be facing more and more indebtedness issues. Japan is the poster case for that at the moment. So I wonder if indeed your research and your report and suggestions in fact did address ways that we can encourage earlier, broad acceptance of individual responsibility for planning for the future. I don't know, that's a big challenge, but it seems like it needs to be there. Absent discourse about that, the chances of the UN report gaining traction in the US domestic political environment are vanishingly small.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There should be more emphasis on that. And it's not a very popular thing because people always rely on either family or they figure that the government, since they've worked an X number of years, that the government owes them something. So savings is their own personal concern. But we should definitely go that route and make sure that starting from young ages, when the question comes up, will there be some Social Security left for me? That is the point in time to tell young people, well, just in case, you better start saving now. And that also, I might add, is not just for income security, but that's also a healthy lifestyle so that then you avoid disability later on. And I think we focus more on the healthy lifestyle from early ages rather than the savings.
Mm-hmm.
But both are important.
I love that you just managed to marry a question about economics with the human condition. I think that's a really neat way of looking at it. We are talking about an individual's ability or an individual's motivation to save for themselves as opposed to depend on the state. But I don't think that question is entirely relevant for much of the world's older population. Whether or not they have the motivation to be able to save for themselves is not nearly as pressing to them as whether or not they have enough to be able to get their grandkids to school, whether or not they have enough to be able to buy medicine that they need in order to be able to be healthy enough to continue to work. Older people, for the most part, don't have access to any sort of savings plan, any sort of individual savings plan. That's something that I think is actually going to be changing with the advent of mobile phones and the ability to do banking through mobile phones. But right now, most people, as we've said, live in rural places where they don't even have access to a bank. And the idea of doing this sort of long-term planning, even if they did have the funds to be able to contribute to their own personal IRA, just isn't a question that's in their orbit.
But it isn't adequate, is it, to say that government, that we must plan, that government must plan in its budget, when in fact the governments at issue frequently have very inadequate budgets as things presently stand with respect to their own infrastructure development for economic growth. It's a conundrum. I don't really represent any particular point of view about it. I'm concerned about your report, your discourse on the subject, and would love to see it more palatable, if you will, for this domestic U.S. I would love to see it strengthened in that regard for the U.S. public.
I I think savings is a luxury for a lot of the world's older persons, unfortunately.
But that said, you can, as countries develop, you start young getting people to save. And I think that point is made quite strongly in the report, so. No, I realize that. So, yes.
Hi, I'm Brittany Vivena from the United Nations Information Center. I have 2 questions. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit about how you see the concerns of older persons incorporated into the post-2015 development structure, and then also how you see the differing cultural attitudes on the treatment of older persons as potentially a challenge to those goals, and what best ways you see of addressing that.
Okay. For the post-MDG process, HelpAge has been very involved since 2011 as we've been ramping up looking at what that process is going to look like and how we can have input. For those of you who might not be so familiar with the MDGs, there were Millennium Development Goals set out and agreed upon by the member states of the United Nations in 2000, with the goal towards halving poverty by 2015. And to do that, they set themselves some very specific goals to be able to achieve that. They involved reduction in communicable diseases, maternal and child health, and a number of other issues. There are 8 of them that they chose to focus on. We're getting towards the end of that process, and we're starting to think about what we're going to do next. The world is starting to think about what they're going to do next in terms of the next set of development goals, if there will be some. They're likely to have a stronger element of sustainability, and right now there are a number of different types of engagement going on to gather the world's input around what they think is important to them. At the grassroots level, there's a website called The World We Want, and that's a great resource for anyone who wants to learn more about the process. At the national level, there are over 100 consultations going on with civil society in different countries around the world to look at what sort of development priorities they have. And at the international level, there are a number of high-level panels going on, being led by the Prime Minister of the UK, as well as Alan Johnson Sirleaf. Sometimes I mix those up. And their next meeting will be in Monrovia next week, and they'll be HelpAge will be covering a panel specifically discussing older people and development, as well as the important role that disability plays in thinking about what we can do and how we can do it better in an inclusive way for the Millennium Development Goals. So we've been working with the UNFPA on the population portion of the discussions and dialogues that are going on in terms of a theme. We've also been looking at conflict and hunger and all sorts of other issues where older people have a really important role to play in helping to alleviate world poverty. For any of the goals that come out of this next process, we have two main things that we're driving at. Any goals or targets that address the whole population should be measured by sex and age disaggregated indicators. Many people don't know that in a lot of countries, they don't gather data on who has HIV if they're over the age of 49. They just don't know. The other one that we're driving at in terms of a cross-cutting mainstreaming approach to aging in the MDGs is the inclusion of targets on increasing a healthy life expectancy, if that's a direction that the consultations end up going in.
Just to add that we had missed the MDGs because there was no mention of older people in the original set of goals for the year 2000. So this time around, we're trying to make sure that this would be in, especially as regards poverty reduction strategies, because the older persons are among, not necessarily the poorest in every society, but among the poorest. So if you don't address the poverty of older persons, you will never address poverty in the world as such.
Question.
Institute of Medicine at the National Academies of Science, and I wanted to say we're having a related event on elder abuse. That's an issue that the IOM has decided to take up, and there will be a 2-day workshop April 17th and 18th on all types of elder abuse. And you can find it on the website of the National Academy of Science.
Thank you.
Is that domestic or international? International. And domestic.
We need data in this area badly.
Thank you.
I'm Charlotte Newsberg, formerly with AARP. I had the privilege of attending the first World Assembly on Aging, and the argument that leaders of developing countries made then, and I think still make now, are that the rich nations became rich before they became old, and we in the developed world are getting old before we can become rich. How can you expect us to do much for our older population? And in light of what Dalmer had to say earlier, even we so-called rich nations are doing such a great job. So what kinds of policies do you think hold the most promise for developing countries that are really doable given their stage of economic and cultural development?
Maybe I'll start the example that I gave from Bolivia, the poorest country in South America, but yet has the largest, pension, and it didn't take much. It was 1.07, if I remember correctly. It didn't take that much, but at least there is something, just to keep the people above the poverty line. So for starters, it has to be a long-term vision and political will, that you do want to do something for older people. They are part of your society. It should be a society for all ages, and you look at all age groups. You do not ignore the older population. They've given to society, they've contributed, they can continue to contribute with just a little bit of money. They can continue to contribute to their families, and in this way, help the governments, in a way, with supporting families with their pensions.
I think that the small cash transfers are the place to start. We've seen incredible progress and we've seen incredible results from just a transfer of $7 a month, $12 a month, $28 a month in your example from Bolivia. When just 5% of the average household income was distributed to older people in the Yucatan in Mexico, they saw a 22% increase in doctor's visits and a 20% increase in the number of girls who showed up at school every day. I think that when we're thinking about what the costs and benefits are, we really need to be factoring in these sort of externalized benefits that come from these small miniature cash transfers. So maybe it wouldn't mess with someone's motivation so much, because it's not like they could live on $6 a month or $7 a month. But if it's enough to help make sure that their business of selling chicken eggs in the local town can give them enough to eat, then it's giving them the boost to have that stability. It's a good question.
Yeah, just one point. I've worried about that statement that we're getting old before we get rich, because there's something a little bit wrong with it. When you particularly when you take a look at the national transfer accounts, you can see that that people in the older ages in many developing countries do not consume a great deal. Now, the bad side of that is they may not be getting the care that they need. On the other hand, they don't have great expectations the way that people in the developed world, and particularly in the U.S., have expectations. And older age benefits are about meeting expectations. So if developing countries start at a low level, say take a look at China's consumption in older ages, it actually declines precipitously after age 60. Take a look at the US, where it grows exponentially after the age about 55. And that's largely a function of healthcare costs. So if developing countries manage expectations, if they provide a reasonable amount with overpromising, then I think they have a fair shot of producing an adequate system for elder care. I think the big challenge may be in countries that have overpromised, because politically bringing people back down to some kind of realistic level is very, very difficult. So I just don't see, I think that whole dichotomy has been completely it's a kind of a quip that people throw out in Washington all the time, and when you really take a look at the consumption levels in developing countries versus, say, welfare states in particular, then you see much different sets of expectations among seniors. Is there other question? John?
John May, Population Reference Bureau. First of all, thank you to all the panelists for thought-provoking presentations. A key message I take from these, from today, is that aging is taking place at a pace that it's increasing, which I think is a key message you had today. So could you elaborate on that, on the increasing pace of aging? And what would be the cause? Is it fertility decline? Is it mortality or longevity expansion? So what's going on? And because I think it's a bit worrisome. Thank you.
A bit worrisome that we can live longer? I would disagree with that. It's because, of course, low fertility. It's lower mortality because of medical advances, technology, better hygiene, healthcare, just awareness of all of these issues of taking care of yourself, and which, of course, leads to longer life expectancy. It's unprecedented. It's never before that you had so many, 810 million people, or 11.5% of the entire global population. So that, we say, is cause for celebration. It is a challenge. We've talked about all these challenges, but those are the reasons, and it's irreversible. There's no going back. We probably will never see families of 5, 6, 7, 8 children like we did in the past, ever. So the trend is toward population aging, as there are less younger people, and then you saw the age pyramids that our moderator presented.
There is one other just sort of immediate factor, particularly for developed countries, and that's just that there hasn't been a war, a big war that caused a lot of death in a number of years, which has, the relative peace has allowed populations to grow, which is also a thing to celebrate. Right.
But my point, let me see, I have a little different take on this, and that is, and John could probably answer this question. I don't know why he asked a question that he can answer, but just to make a point, is that at the, of course, if you consider median age a gauge by which you observe aging, then of course most youthful countries are influenced by the decline in fertility, which advances the median age. Because they first are going through infant mortality decline, which actually brings the median age down. That said, the control of mortality in older years, which happens with typically with economic development, that influences the life expectancy at older ages, particularly after age 60. So as we move into industrial development or a difference in healthcare and society, then you see aging being largely motivated or driven by increases in life expectancy at old ages. And it's considerable. You now, I guess Japan, besides having a very low fertility rate, it's probably still below 1.3, I think, is also has this extraordinary record of survival, particularly among women. So I think the last I looked, life expectancy at birth for Japanese women was around 83. If I remember right, don't quote me, but take a look. And is that right? And it's about that, 83, and so we're behind. And this life expectancy at old ages continues to increase steadily. And there's an entire argument about its limits. So as Dalmer and John pointed to, this is going to increase, and the tensions will increase with it. There was another point I was going to make, but I think I'll stop there. And Liz, did you have a question?
I did. I'm Elizabeth Schenecker. I'm retired from many years at USAID in the Global Health Bureau. Thank you for your presentations. I learned a lot, particularly about the speed of aging as it's around the world. And I found that really amazing. I was also a bit confused in the presentations about when you were talking about developed countries and when you were talking about developing countries. And it seems to me that the situations are, in fact, quite different. I do think that in the US and probably other developed countries, we do have some of the issues you mentioned about age discrimination and autonomy and rights, human rights as one gets older, that do need to be addressed. And there probably are resource issues for many people as well. But on the whole, I think it would be fairly hard to argue that those of us who are seniors, and I'm definitely one of them, are not getting our fair share of national resources, because I think many people would argue that we are getting maybe more than our share. Now, the situation is probably quite different in developing countries, and all of the things that you mentioned rang very true to me. But even on the health side in developing countries, I'm sure it's no secret to you that aid and the other development agencies are still focusing very hard on the current Millennium Development Goals, right? We're focusing on bringing down maternal mortality and on lowering child mortality. But I think the lessons we've learned in doing that are probably just as appropriate for the kinds of things that you're talking about. We had to start with data, and you've mentioned data many times. The demographic and health surveys are absolutely critical to what we do. And you will need your own kinds of surveys to get the kinds of data you need. But other things that we worked on for many, many years, things like policy issues, things like developing policy champions in developing countries. We can't go in there and change policies. People in the countries need to change them, right? We can work with them to strengthen them. And developing civil society advocates to support those policymakers in changing things probably are going to be just as critical to you as they have been to us in working on other health issues. And then the other thing I think that we found, and that you almost have to do in order to continue to get resources, is to pick your battles. Pick the things. You're not going to be able to do everything. When we're focusing very much now on maternal and child health, those are real focus areas. Family planning has been a focus area for a long time. But you pick those, and then you have to have proven low-cost interventions. Things that you can show that don't cost a lot of money, and things where you can then show in your data gathering that you're getting results. And it just seems to me that, this is almost overwhelming because you have so many recommendations. And it's nice to have as a background for understanding, but I think in order to move forward, you're really going to have to pick your battles. And it seems to me that some of them that I heard you mention, cataract surgery is cheap. It's like miracle surgery, right? That's something that really improves people's lives. Low-cost hypertension medications, cheap, really improves people's lives. Small cash transfers. You may not be able to do everything, but once you can show that some of your interventions have huge effects, I think it helps you move forward.
Thank you very much, Liz. That's great points.
Can I comment
Yeah,
on
of
that? I
course.
like your idea of picking your battles. The recommendations are global, so countries will pick and choose what will address their issues most. But what we also saw is that tying issues of older persons to other existing issues works best, especially if you want to get at budgets and if you want to get attention. So, for example, tying issues to already existing gender issues include older women's issues whenever you talk about gender issues. HIV/AIDS, there's a lot of money going to AIDS. How about siphoning a little bit of that money for the grandmothers who take care of AIDS orphans? So there are lots of existing issues already, healthcare issues, than the healthcare of older people. And that stands a better chance of being budgeted, especially if money is tight and society does not really relish the fact of giving money to the older persons.
The point about picking your battles is very well taken. In terms of our work, in terms of HelpH's work, we have a number of projects that work on mother-to-child transmission of AIDS through grandmothers that have great success. We have cataract surgery vans that provide over 300,000 cataract surgeries per year in India alone. These sorts of proven interventions that can change people's lives are something that we're definitely still gathering data on, but the data from our programs is what we have to show for it. In terms of that translating into policy change within USAID, we have a long way to go. We have the data. I used the example of the amount of funding that older people end up receiving out of the total pot for humanitarian crises. It's less than 1%. And that data, along with a number of targeted meetings regarding the protection issues that older people face in emergencies, changed the USAID donor guidelines for the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. But that took a lot of time and a lot of targeted effort to make happen. And we have gains like that to make throughout much of USAID in terms of seeing how older people fit into the broader goals around things like HIV/AIDS. Many people don't know that older people between the ages of 50 and 60 in Kenya or in South Africa have twice the infection rate with HIV as people between the ages of 20 and 30. Twice. And no one knows, and no one is thinking about that in terms of the entire attack on the pandemic. I think that your point about targeting civil society and helping them to be enabled to provide their own advocacy is great. It's great to hear it from someone who's been at USAID, because that is the primary way that we operate. We have these 4,000 older persons associations around the world, these small groups that are grassroots change organizations working for whatever interests are important to them. And we have a campaign that's called Age Demands Action. And it has its own website if anyone else is interested in looking at it. This year, we mobilized older people in 60 countries to lobby their national governments for change. They wanted different things. Some wanted better health care. Some wanted non-contributory small cash transfer. Some wanted to not have to wait in line when they were getting the transfers that they were entitled to. There are all sorts of things, and that's community-led. That's grassroots-led change. And lastly, there are certainly differences between growing old in the U.S. and growing old in a developing country. I think that the discrimination that people can face when they become older is one thing that sort of ties everyone together. There are a number of issues, but that's just something to close on. Thank you.
Okay, it's time to end right here. Please join me in thanking Bethany and Ann for wonderful presentations. Thank you, audience, and please look at the Environmental Change and Security Project's website. You can look at the video again, and you can see the supporting documents. Thank you all.
It's very nice to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you, Ann. Thanks for a wonderful presentation. I have your, let me give it to Ann. And here's John's.
Thank you very much. Yes, I do.
Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you.
The warming part is not the aging, it's the lack of response to aging.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now we can be in touch.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.